The ravens came early, as if they had flown all night to outrun what they carried. The birds broke the gray that lay like damp wool over Winterfell, each one a fleck of beating black, and their shadows crossed the frost-laced stones of the inner ward and the still surface of the hot pools. Theon watched them from the wall walk, his fingers gone numb upon the crenellation, though he did not remove them. Dawn had not yet broken. The light was a smothered smear leaking over the eastern pines. He had known cold on pike, the sort that tasted of brine and iron on the teeth, but the north's cold had a way of getting into your breath and setting up house. Below, the yard lay prim with its rime, every footprint made yesterday now a white scar, and the armory's door stood half ajar with a rim of yellow firelight showing and the muffled ring of metal within. Theon could have gone down the steps and warmed his hands beside that forge, let the heat roll through him until his joints remembered they were young. Instead he stayed until the last raven slid across the slate of sky and the world settled again. And then he breathed, and only then did it turn to smoke in front of his mouth and drift away like a kept secret. "Storms not come," said Maester Luwin, climbing beside him. A scarf wrapped twice about his throat and the little silver chain white with hoar. But something did. Hank tells me he counted 8, all bearing the same seal. Theon smiled without humor. And the seal? Salt and Kraken. Luwin's eyes flicked, not quite apologetic. He had the habit of being gentle even with a knife of a word. "You knew before you asked. Before the birds left the rookery," Theon said. He unglued his hand from the stone and flexed the fingers one by one. He could still feel the shape of the notch under his palm. 8 is a showy number. Father always did love a procession. Your father sends letters to Winterfell only to vex you? Everyone else he vexes with raiders, Theon said, and he went down the narrow stair with Luwin's soft boot soles whispering behind him. The maester's tower smelled of hot ink and sage. A brazier snapped in the corner and Theon took the place nearest it by right of having risen earliest. Though there were no rites like that here, Winterfell was orderly with its courtesies. He untied the ribbon from the first tube. The wax was that old familiar black, a wet shine, as if it had only just been dredged from the sea, and when he broke it, it gave with a tear like flesh. He read without speaking. Luwin watched his face. When he had done, he went to the brazier and fed the letter to the coals. The fire read the words in a low voice of its own, lines curling into themselves like shriveling fish, as if they were eager to be done with what they told. He opened the next and did the same. Luwin finally said, after 3 seals and 3 scorches, "If these are for my Lord Bran, they're for me," Theon said. "A father to a son. He says he's proud." He laughed, and it leapt out of him oddly. "Proud I did not shame him by returning to Robb like a bitch to its master's boot. He bids me come to Pike, to stand at his right hand as the iron is taken from soft necks along the stony shore. He will take Moat Cailin as a man plucks a tick. He says the north has forgotten the sea. And you will not go." Luwin's mouth might have been a writing feather, so thin it was in that moment. "You have said as much. Not go." Theon leaned on the table and felt the bare wood under his palm, the grain's slow roll, the rough at the edge where some apprentice had gouged it. "I did not go. The first raven he sent, you remember it, sent at Seaguard when Robb named me his envoy. Come home, blood of my blood, and be the true son I raised to salt." The maester's gaze was a deep pool, and he did not throw stones upon it. "And you sent back our refusal." Theon's mouth tasted of old coin. He had seen the letter again last night, in the dark behind his eyes, after he had turned on his pallet and tried to pretend sleep, had only staggered and would be back. He had written it with something like the edge of laughter in him and like a cut. "My king bids me tell you his iron will have no place near his hearth if it comes with knives for his back. My father in truth sits beneath a weirwood and says little, but he looks. I will not come. The north has not forgotten the sea," Theon said. "The sea comes for you whenever you turn your back on it. You must keep turning until you are dizzy and then sit against a rock and wait for it to lose interest." "You will not sit," Luwin murmured, "nor wait. No." Theon looked up as footsteps came in the winding stair and Bran stood at the arch, hair uncombed and furs half-tied, with Hodder behind him and the direwolves at the threshold as if the tower must ask their leave to bear them. Rickon pressed at Bran's side like a small storm cloud, his hair sticking out around his face. The boy's cheeks were raw with cold and sleep was in their eyes like ink not yet dried. "What did the ravens bring?" Bran asked. He was getting good at saying the things he knew men were already thinking, as if he had learned the shape of their silences. "Trouble," Theon said, too lightly perhaps. He went to Bran and knelt so they were of a height. Even with his knees complaining, it made him feel at ease. "But trouble we saw coming, so it will not catch us surprised. Dress warm today. Ride the wall twice with me. Then we'll see how the winter stores look. I intend to be boring all morning, my lord." Bran's mouth did not quite go to a smile, but his eyes eased. "Osha says the pools will smoke thicker when the wind has teeth," he said. "Osha is right about most things," Theon said. He stood. "Hodder, you'll carry Bran for the second turn. The steps are slick." "Hodder?" the giant murmured, and it was a scent and the promise of his back, and a little sorrow. Rickon scowled at Theon as if the man had snatched some toy of his. "Are we going to fight pirates?" "Raids," Luwin said mildly. "There is a difference between a raid and a war, young Rickon. Are we going to fight people who think they can take our food in boats?" Rickon amended fiercely. Theon considered and said nothing. In Pike, an answer had been to cuff the boy's ear and call him pretty names for his mother. Winterfell had another grammar. He set a hand briefly on Rickon's head, and the boy bore it as if the touch were a helm he had not expected to wear. They rode the walls with the world scoured clean beneath them. Theon counted roofs as he went, 1, 2, 1, 2, each a weight under his tongue. The smoke from the glass gardens perched in blue threads. The godswood behind the kitchens kept its secret white skeleton amid all the black and gray, and the heart tree's bark was a rude gash of color in a landscape that had forgotten how to bleed. Theon had always liked the godswood least. Men said the old gods had no priests but they had 1,000 eyes, and every knot in the great weir-root had once seemed to him a pupil in search of his shame. They paused above the outer gate. The yard there was busy, and it lifted Theon's heart to see it. Luwin had already sent the yard boys to haul oil casks and spare timber, and the smith had a boy going through every bucket, running a hand along the rope and throwing aside the ones that came away frayed. Men of the garrison were gray with the day but alert in their limbs, better for the frost's bite. Theon spoke each name he knew and learned 3 he had not taken the trouble to remember. Names anchor men, he thought. Give a drunk his own and he'll step easier along a wall. When they reached the corner turret above the pools, Theon drew Bran's pony up and pointed toward the direction of White Harbor. "If we had time," he said, "I'd send for Manderly's men now, but ravens can fly faster than ox carts, and we have days at most before the first gray sails edge into sight along the shivering sea." "Days," Bran repeated. His gloved hands had the clumsy patience of someone who would outride his body if it would let him. "I dreamed summer swam," he said abruptly. He does not like cold water, but he swam as if it had always been in him. "I woke thirsty." Theon had nothing wise to say to that. He felt the wolves' gaze like arrows on his nape. He could not tell from whom they guarded, and it gave him an old shame that he would ever think to fear Hodder's shadow or Bran's hand. "I will send to Torrens Square," he said instead. "Ser Roderick has been raising the Hornwoods and the Tallhearts. He will come, and he will not be alone." They came down at last. The day that followed was indeed as dull as Theon had promised. He went to the gatehouse and took measure of the drawbridge chain and the condition of the winches. He sent 3 men up the old tower to check the rookery's shutters and to oil hinges so any raven that wanted in would not have to choose between sending broken knuckles through and turning back to die with ice on its wings. He walked the stores with Beth Castle as she tallied, and Theon learned how many jars of turnips could sour if left too near the heat, and how much salt beef would go if you let men grow careless with their slicing. He drank ale and watered it twice, and to his surprise it tasted better and not worse for it. At midday, when the outer shadows were becoming things and not mere shades, they came. From the watchtower, Theon saw them first as beads of tin out upon a table of pewter. The river that ran along the low face of Winterfell was a sluggish vein, but it was a cousin to other water, and what the sea loved the river would remember. The sails looked like cut tongues from far enough away, a gray within the gray of the day, and then he saw one he knew, a break in the weave near the yardarm from the time Asha. She called herself Yara where the salt-bleached names, had called him soft and he had tried to show her otherwise and she had laughed, and a squall had done the rest. "You know whose longship that is?" Luwin said, beside him. "I know which sister rides it," Theon said. "They sent no messenger to the gate. They were ironborn. They would have thought it polite insult to ask that anyone open for them. Raiders left their courtesy in the bilges with the water slopping and the eel stink." Theon watched the ship's tack without impatience, as if the men below were moving game pieces in some huge, slow dice he no longer cared to cast. His mouth tasted of ash. Somewhere in him a boy was yelling very fast, and Theon put his hand on the stone until the boy's breath quieted. "Send word," he said. "No one opens the gate unless I call for it. 2 men to each oil cask. Archers to the wall walk, but stand them easy. If the wind will turn against those sails, let it be the wind, not our arrows. And fetch Osha. I want her eyes on the postern." Luwin nodded and wheeled away. Osha came like something that had learned to walk in a forest and afterward had remembered how to cross a yard full of men. She did not advertise her knowledge. It sat close to her under her tunic, like the knife she always wore. She looked out past Theon's shoulder and the shrug in her mouth was not for him. "Sea rats," she said. "They run with knives. They won't try to stare you down. They'll crawl under you." "They'll try the postern near the kennels," Theon said. "It's the only gate fancy enough to be half forgot. They'll have a man in the water already." Feeling for the stones where the wall grew lazy, she glanced at him then, quick as a pulled fishbone pricking a finger. "You know that. I learned it," he said, as if it had been given to him by a book that had been kind. "Take 6 and go first. If they come with rope, cut it. If they bring a hook, take the man at the chain. Don't call to him. He'll answer you with his mouth and his other hand will fetch your blood." He paused, hearing the odd tone in himself, like iron on oiled leather. "Kill them quiet if you can." Osha's face made no judgment. "Quiet," she said, and she was gone with her 6, their backs breathing under their leathers like the flanks of hill cats. They waited. Winterfell knew how to do that. Theon counted his own breaths in the shelter of the Merlin. Waited until they forgot they were counting. When the first ironborn arrow ticked against the outer gate, it sounded like a beetle flinging itself against a candle lantern. A second followed, and then a third, and then those below shouted and laughed, and someone blew a horn and made the sound small by blowing wrong. Theon felt his mouth go dry. He looked left and right along the wall walk and saw the men's faces, those he had greeted by name 2 hours ago. He could have killed for them, he thought. He wondered if he would have to. A rope ladder came up near the northeast angle, of course it did. The angle left a blind spot for any archer standing where a sane man would stand. But the rope did not rise to meet them like a tongue hungering for a taste of stone. It jerked once and then went slack, and there was a sound like fish thrashing in a bucket and then nothing. Theon's breath left him and came back. "Watch the gate," he said softly. "They will show us one thing in the front and come for us at the back." He waited for Asha to show herself. He felt the way you feel a weather that has not arrived yet. When she came, she did so on foot, in a coat of boiled leather with iron rings sewn through and the swagger that came with being born to rough weather and never drowned by it. She stood within bowshot because she knew no arrow would kill her while she was talking. She had hair braided with bits of shell and a scar, half hid, that ran close to one ear like a rivulet that had chosen not to be a river. There were 20 men behind her and 10 ahead who had thrown their shields like coin into the yard for show. "Theon," she called up. "Little brother, have they got you on a chain up there?" "It's a warm chain," Theon said. He had not meant to answer her the way he would have in Pike, but his tongue remembered and went there before he could stop it. "You remember warmth," she said. "That's good. It will help you live long enough to die without shame. Send down the boys and the food and the forge's iron. Send down the weirwood if you like." Father will make a fine stool of it. Come with me, and you can sit on it and tell me why you're all dressed up in a dead god's castle." "Winterfell is not dead," Theon said, "nor its gods." Asha's laughter came up like salt spray. "The tree bleeding its old stories does not make them true. Come down." "Come up," Theon said, and he let the words fall quiet. "Alone." She considered that and lifted her chin. "I'll come to the gate so you can see I brought no knife between my teeth," she said. "But I won't hand you my hands. I was not born yesterday in a tower nursery. You were born on the rocks and baptized in a storm," Theon said, so softly he wondered if she heard. He gestured. The men at the winch unrolled the drawbridge a yard and no more. He went down himself to the archway with 2 men at his back and Lewin's breath behind him like a prayer. He stood in the shadow of the portcullis. Asha stood several strides beyond the dripping line of the bridge where the frost made a glass of what yesterday had been mud. Between them was a trap any sensible man would leave alone. "You won't open," she said. It was not quite a question.
"No."
"Then you mean to starve? Or burn? Do you know how easily these old woods will take? Your pretty low roofs? Father would say it's like burning a cradle. Better to be quick." She studied him. "When we were children, you danced on the edge of parapets to find out if the wind would catch you or not. This is another parapet. I've a long ship down there with a place on her nose where the paint peels like a scab. The wind will catch you if you leap now. You've a scar that runs under your hair like a road a man can't see on the map," Theon said. "You got it when you tried to teach me to climb the mast without using my feet. You told me the trick was in the arms." Asha's eyes did not leave his. "You were light then." "I am not heavier now for any love of the sea. I can hold more steel without shaking." He drew breath. "Go home." "I am home," Asha said with matter-of-fact contempt, as if she had put her thumb into a bowl and found it empty. "You are the one sleeping in a stranger's bed. Father will laugh when I tell him your voice remembered how to say my name, at least. Tell him also it remembered how to say no," Theon said, and he felt the weight of the word go down through the bridge and into the water below. "Tell him it did not break my teeth to do it." Her gaze flicked past him, taking the measure of Winterfell's throat and ribs. She was already bored with him. He felt the moment like a draft when a man opens a door and another closes. "Very well," Asha said. "We'll see if no keeps a belly filled. We'll see what it does for fires in the night." She turned and went, and the men with her went, and no one gave a back to a bowshot, because ironborn learned that before they learned how to wipe salt from their eyes. They did not come for the gate again that day. They went to the river and paved it with boats and rope, and they made camp where the ground had a stubbornness to it, like a grandam's jaw. Theon watched them make their tents, which were sails inverted, and he thought he could smell the sea on the wind, though there was only river and pine and old smoke. He saw Osha slip back in at the postern and touch 2 fingers to her lips and then to the earth. He took it as a sign that meant there would be ghosts to count. When night came, it came thick. The pools steamed as if the castle were a horse, and someone had ridden it hard and put it away wet. Theon sat with the men in the guardroom and chewed their meat and spat the gristle and listened to how they spat, learned which of them would say names first when the doors went in. He did not drink more than a mouthful of ale, and he made sure they saw that. If Theon Greyjoy's hand was steady, then theirs would shame itself if it shook. He allowed himself the gods would for a little while. The heart tree's face looked as it always did, not blessed, not forgiving, merely alive in an old way that did not much care what lived or died around it. Theon stood before the red mouth cut into the trunk and said aloud, because it felt less like begging that way, "I have a father who would have me drown and call it birth. I have a father who says nothing unless the leaves lift to listen. If this is where I sit and wait, I will sit. If I must do more, send me a wind that smells of something other than salt." He felt foolish, and then he felt nothing, and then he felt a quiet in him that was not his. When he returned to the yard, Jojen Reed was there, and Mira stood with him like his taller echo. They had a look as if they were weather that had not finished happening. Jojen's green eyes were the only color in him. "You should not stand in the water in your sleep," he said to Theon, as if they were resuming a conversation they had begun months ago. I don't, Theon said, and saw Mira watching him, weighing the truth as if she could tell it by its heft. You will, Jojen said, but not tonight. He lifted his small chin toward the walls. They will test the north face. The stones there are tired. They remember hands and feet better than the others. They will think like men who have fished in winter and do not mind if their hands ache. Thank you, Theon said, and there was no insult in it. He had learned that, at least. He touched Jojen's shoulder lightly with a knuckle as one mig. HT touch a bow to ask if it will hold. They posted more men along the north face. The night breezed thin and the torches stood up straight, smoke smearing the stars. Hours passed like a long, slow fish turning in the deep. Then there was the scrape. One of the men swore under his breath, and Theon laid a finger on the wall between them and the word shrank back into his throat. He peered down and caught the moment a hook bit. He had told them Ironborn would not waste time with catapult or bluff. They would come with hooks and quiet feet and teeth. Take the rope, Theon murmured, and two of his men went to their bellies and worked with axes. The rope trembled like a plucked string. There were small sounds below. He imagined how the Ironborn would be speaking to one another in voices like tide leaking from a cave. The first man up saw Theon's face 10 heartbeats before he died. He was not a man Theon knew, but there was a family of the mouth, and Theon thought he knew his aunt's laugh in that shape. He shot him in the throat, and the man went without more than surprise, and Theon did not let himself count it as mercy. Another came hard, and this one's shape was familiar enough to make Theon's hands forget themselves. In the half-moment between his mind and the bowstring, a knife bit his forearm where the leather gaped, and Theon's breath went tight, and then the man was gone. Theon had pushed him with a boothiel into the nothing below and listened for the wetness of his end, and did not hear it because men are not rain. They cut every rope in their reach. They flung back the hooks. They kept their torches guttering but alight. A man to Theon's left died with a little "oh," as if someone had stepped hard on his toe. An arrow found the seam between gorget and mail, and Theon looked at his mouth and could not look away until Mira's hand was on his elbow and moving him, and he did not know where she had come from, only that she was there, and so was her net in the snow, and she left it and took his place and threw, and you could hear the sound of a man being pulled down by surprise and whirled going from under his feet. They held the walls until the dark seemed to tire of itself. At last a horn sounded below, this one blown by someone who knew what a horn was for, and the calls went like a language across the iron camp, and Theon leaned with his shoulder against the merlin and breathed and felt the pain in his arm speak back to him. Luwin bound it while the sun made shy work of the ridge line. You're bleeding on Winterfell, Luwin said mildly. I've bled on poorer stones, Theon said, and he was not certain whether the words were his or the boy's. Will you send to Robb? Luwin asked. Theon considered. Robb had sent him north with a clasp of the forearms that had hurt his bones. Hold my house, he had said. You have slept beneath its roof. You know what it means. Theon had accepted the words as a man accepts a cloak he fears he cannot fill and sets his mouth to it anyway. I sent already, Theon said, the day the first raven came from Pike. What did you tell him? Luwin's hands were deft and dry. Theon felt them as one feels a familiar page. That I would hold, Theon said simply. That I would write again if I failed. Luwin made a soft noise, and Theon did not ask if it was laughter or sorrow. By noon, word came from the postern. Osha's people had taken 2 men alive. Theon went to see them in the cold smell of the kennel yard. They were younger than he had hoped, and it took some of the steel out of laughter to see it. One had a nose that had been broken and mended twice. The other had the sort of shoulder that looked like it would never sit right even in a hot bath. They looked back at Theon and saw him only as the color of his hair and name of his father. You come home to us now? The broken nose said. It was not taunt. It was as clean an invitation as a man could make with his mouth full of blood. We'll put you in the bow. You can taste first spray. It'll rinse the stink out of you. I have washed, Theon said, and it was the end of it. He turned to Osha. Give them into Luwin's care. Feed them and bind their wounds. To the men who had caught them, he added, "And tell each of these that he will go home in the spring if he lives that long. He will tell the others that Winterfell kept its word better than their fathers keep their wives." "You can trade with men you won't kill?" one of the guards said, half wondering. "You can heat iron without melting it," Theon answered. "We'll have more to beat tomorrow." They did. The ironborn made a show of idleness sometimes. Then they came like lice and tried to live in Winterfell's hair. It went like that for 3 days. Rope and hook and knife, a small hand-truth that had to be answered the way a man answers a child who keeps asking the same unanswerable thing. Theon did not sleep more than a handful of hours, and when he slept, he dreamed of a tide that left his feet dry but soaked his heart up to the throat. When he woke, it was with summer's weight near at hand, and the wolf went away only when Theon opened his eyes enough to let the human world in. On the 4th day, banners came down the White Knife Road, and every man on the wall whose lungs had air in them gave it to the sky in thanks. The tall banners with their dire wolves, the stout squares with tall heart pine. Ser Rodrik Castle rode at the head with frost stiff in his mustache and his hair stiff as well though wind had been at it. He looked up at Winterfell as a man looks at his wife's face when he is late. Theon felt something in him ease and recede itself, and he did not resent it. They opened then. A man enacts courtesy best when it is not a favor but a law. Ser Rodrik breathed out steam like a horse and took Theon's forearm in a grip that made old bruises remember themselves. "You have done me proud," he said without ceremony. "I did you work," Theon said. He could not yet take praise and digest it. "You did it well," Ser Rodrik insisted. He pointed with his chin at the iron camp. "They hold. They can hold there for a fortnight if they like to freeze. I have word that Dreadfort men are marching. Roose Bolton's bastard rides with them under a pink flayed man, but Bolton does not come himself. He says he is occupied with a host upon the Green Fork." Theon kept his face still. The flayed man's banner made his skin crawl, as perhaps it was meant to do. "If the bastard comes, he will come with his father's caution," he said. "Or with his own hunger," Ser Rodrik said. "We'll pitch our tents inside the walls tonight and sleep where the heat of the stones can do us good. In the morning, we'll speak with the Lady Asha." "Speak," Theon said. "We are not pirates," Ser Rodrik answered. "We offer terms, we keep our word, we allow the enemy a way to live. A way to run is a way to be killed, but a way to live is a way to end a siege before the first fever. This is Winterfell." They gave Asha the offer in shouting voice across the White Yard and Black River. "Lay down arms, give up the boats, take your wounded and go on foot back to the sea. In return, every man would receive a loaf and a skin and a warning that would keep his head on his neck for the week it took to get out of the north." She listened with one hip cocked and her head lowered as if she were listening to a goat bleat. Then she shook her head and spat into the snow delicates as a lady, for humor. "My feet no boats," she said. "They get sick on land. We'll keep to water." After that, Ser Rodrik settled in with the patient cruelty of a man who could teach slowness. They erected 2 scorpions and dragged a trebuchet into place from storage that felt like legend to Theon. He had played at being kings beside it when he was a boy who could not imagine men who could lift the beams. They threw little at first, stones the size of heads, then larger, then barrels full of offal. "Let them smell their future," Ser Rodrik said, and the men laughed, and that laughter did them as much good as the barrels did the ironborn. On the 5th night, the horn sounded in the trees as the bastard of Bolton came with his men. It was a hollow sound that made Theon think of a rib cage blown as a horn. The banners came behind, and the leering flayed man danced a little in the wind. Theon went down to the gate with Ser Rodrik and with Luwin and with Beth Castle and with 24 good men. He did not like the look of the bastard's eyes. He had seen dogs look at meat with less heat in them. "We come to be of service," the bastard said. His tone pretended to be milk, curdled upon the tongue. He named himself only as Ramsay Snow, as if that were a jest he had invented and could repeat without end. "Winterfell is served," Ser Rodrik said, "but we'll have your men's spears on the east, if you take the slope and watch for any trickery." Ramsay looked past Ser Rodrik up at the walls. up at Theon as if a man might look up a chimney to see if Santa had left a bone. "We'll watch," he said. His smile was thin enough to thread. "You've a guest from further north still," he added. "A crow's son who does not belong to any castle yet. He'll grow into one if you don't watch him." "What do you mean?" Luwin asked. Ramsay licked his teeth as if meat might be caught there. "Only that boys grow like weeds when no one's looking," he said, and the men behind him laughed like branches breaking under cold. They took the east slope and Theon did not turn his back to them as he climbed back to the wall. He told Bran later, in the little room they used when it was too cold to be gentle to themselves in the yard, "Keep to the keep's heart. Do not go out unless Hodder carries you, and then with Wolf and Osha both." "You talk to me like I am 6, Bran said, and Summer pricked his ears and made a sound like a breath turned inside out. "I talk to you like you will be Lord, and you will need to be alive when that happens," Theon answered. He had found himself talking slowly these days and liking what it did to words. "You have a man on our side who enjoys the cut of a man more than any cloth he has worn. He is dangerous the way river ice is dangerous. It looks strong enough to bear, and then it isn't." Bran looked at him a moment as if he didn't know whether to say thank you or fuck you. He chose the first. "Will you sleep?" "A little," Theon said. "Enough to remember how, so when the winter is long I won't need lessons." He slept and dreamed he stood in the Godswood and the weirwood's mouth moved to say, "What is your name?" Theon said, "Theon of Pike, Theon of Winterfell, Theon of Theon," and the tree said nothing, which was better than laughter. In the morning, the ironborn set 2 boats afire and sent them like gifts at Winterfell's river face. It was a gull's trick and would have been pretty if it had not been doing work. Theon had already ordered buckets along the parapets and for men to soak their cloaks and lay them along the parts of the walkway that would take the sparks. The boats pinwheeled gently and bumped in, disappointed not to be let into any open mouth. The men doused the fire with curses, and that did them more good than water. At noon there was a parley. Asha came again, and this time she had a man with her whose hair was as white as a drowned rope left to dry in winter. Dagmar Cleftjaw. He grinned up at the walls through the gap in his teeth and looked as friendly as a crack in a keel log. "Boy," he shouted, "we taught you to spit, and you've learned to swallow. You taught me to climb what I should not and to leave what is not mine," Theon called back. "I learned better," Dagmar snorted. "You learned to mule at a lord's breast." "I learned to speak to men who can count past 10, Theon said. "What do you want, old man? Your fingers are cold. Warm them somewhere else." Dagmar's grin did not shift. "Your sister wants to take your head back to your father floating in a bucket of the water you forgot was in your veins. I want to take your hands back in mine. This is mercy, boy. Mercy is remembering where you came from and drawing the knife slow." Asha said, "We'll leave if you let us, the way you asked," and her eyes slid to Ser Rodrik in acknowledgement of the offer he'd made. "We'll carry our boats around your gate like women carry babies, and we'll put them back in the water downstream. We won't bother your wall again, but we'll take your Kraken with us. He'll be a guest. He'll dine at our table. We'll send him back come spring, fat with the salt." "No," Theon said. "Then we'll stay," Asha said, shrugging. "We're not suffering. We chose to be cold." "You were born cold," Theon said. "Be colder." He did not see the blow coming at dusk. They had the east slope set with men that were not Boltons and men that were, and it took Theon until he looked from the wall and back to the yard below to notice how many of the men on the slope had gathered near the treeline, and how few shadows those men cast at their backs where the sun lay longer than it should. "Ser Rodrik," he said quietly, and the old knight stepped to his shoulder. "Do you see them?" "I do," Ser Rodrik said. His voice did not change. "We will hold. We will not open." It was that simple. He sent Beth Castle to the inner gate with 10 men, and Theon saw the moment Ramsay realized he would not be let like wind into the yard to do what wind does to loose things. A messenger came down the slope very slowly and said very loudly, "Lord Snow begs leave to enter and assist," and Beth called back, "Assist from without." And the look on Ramsay's face went briefly like a child's on being denied a toy he had already put his hand upon, and then he smiled again and looked like a man who could wait until a toy had been forgotten and then take it without anyone hearing. "Watch him," Theon said, though he did not have to say it now that he had said it once. The men on the walls did not lean. Men who lean fall, Theon knew that, and the lesson had cost him no blood this time. There was a sound in the kennels after dark, a thin whine followed by a yelp. Theon went himself with two of the kennelmaster's lads and Summer and Shaggy Dog moving like thoughts around their legs. The gate there was latched, but the latch had been lifted. Theon's skin crawled at his neck before his hand knew it wanted to draw his knife. He lifted the gate, and it did not squeal because twice that day he had sent the same boy to oil it. He wondered if he should have left it to squeal. Then he would have been told. What came out of the dark did not come out as an attack, but as a suggestion. A man's shadow on the wall moved where no man stood. Theon threw himself and the knife met a throat with a little sound, and the shadow fell away into a man after all, and the blood that came with it was real enough to settle Theon's doubts about what he had done with his life. Summer's mouth closed around a second arm, and there was a ragged tear of meat and a cry that died quickly. It was over in moments, and afterward the kennels smelled like iron and dog and fear, the last sharp and tangy like something fresh cut. "They're testing every seam," Theon said softly to the dying man, who blinked as if trying to see a thing far in the distance. "They won't find one unless we give it them." He did not die easy. Theon kept him company through it, hand on the man's shoulder, and afterward he wiped the knife on the straw and looked at his own fingers and saw how steady they had become. "We hold," he told the wolves, and they licked the blood from their chops and did not disagree. Snow came in the night and made everything clean that could be made so. In the morning they threw more stones from the trebuchet, and the stones went true, and they broke 2 boats and men with them, and the ironborn began to pull back toward the river's bend. Asha came to the bank once more and waved, and Theon did not go. He watched from the wall as she spoke with Dagmar, and Dagmar's hands cut the air at his side, and she set a hand on his wrist to still them. He liked her then, in a way you could like a storm if you knew where the caves were. On the 7th day, word came from White Harbor, borne by a little, brisk courier who had 3 layers of wool and looked like a cabbage. Wyman Manderley would not send his men, being occupied with ships and the guarding of those things that are not easily made but easily stolen. The letter said in a neat round hand that could not hide the girth behind it. But he sent bread, salt pork, and boats of his own, and the message ended with, "You are the wall and we are the sea beside you, and I will not have my harbor emptied by thieves while you fight my fight for me upon land. Make your need plain in writing and I'll answer with what I can give twice over in kind." Manderley had a poet somewhere in his kitchen, it seemed. Theon grinned without meaning to. "Bread is better than boys from a lord who can be bought with flattery," Ser Roderick said, which for him was enthusiasm. They kept the boats back. They did not get lazy. When Ramsay's men lit fires that sent meat smells with the smoke, Theon let no one go near their camp to take account of it. And when 2 riders came up with a flag of truce to ask for parley, Ser Roderick met them with 20 men and stood 10 paces away and kept them speaking aloud so the archers on the walls could hear. "Your lord must find another place to hunt," Ser Roderick said, and Ramsay's men smiled and pretended not to understand. On the 9th day, the ironborn broke. They did not break with drums or horns. They simply gathered their lines in like fishermen and began to move without swagger. They cut their camplins as if they had seen a ghost. They put men with shields in the backs of their boats and shoved them like beached whales over snow and ice to where the water remembered its work. "What stirs them?" Beth asked, shading her eyes. Theon could not answer until he saw Asha put her hand on Dagmar's arm, and he saw the way his shoulders changed after that, as if someone had taken a measure of weight from them that he had grown used to. "Father," Theon said softly. "He calls them West, or he calls her West, and the rest go because she brings them the only games worth playing." He did not have to see the raven or the letter to know the words it would have taught. Theon felt something like relief, and the feeling sickened him. They did not harry the ironborn as they left. Men wanted to, men who had lost friends to rope and hook and the cold in their lungs, but Winterfell's law held their hands. Ser Roderick said, "There will be other places to kill them, and I will not have our arrows begging to be gathered up by men who can use them again." 2 boats struck a rock and went under like bad thoughts, and the men in them scrambled like beetles on a board, and it was enough. When the river was empty again, when the ice and the stones and the poor, thin sun were the only things left to look at, Theon finally let the weight lean back from his bones and find the stones underneath. In the afternoon, his arm throbbed with the sort of pain that told you the worst of the body's anger had passed and the dull work of making again had begun. He ate bread with meat and did not taste either. He sat with Bran for an hour and did not say much, and Bran did not fill the space with words, which Theon loved him for. "You saved this," Bran said, not looking at Theon. Reading some ledger Luwin had set him that had numbers in it like barley seeds. "I saw a wolf swim, and then I saw a boy in the water who would not drown but would not get out either. And then it was you on the wall and you were not in the water." Theon made a noise that might have been a thank you if you set it in a bowl and put a spoon in it. "I stood where I could," he said. At dusk, Luwin came up to the wall again. His cheeks chapped as if the day had slapped him, his chain glittering with small, silly pride. "There is a raven from Robb," he said. Theon took it and stared at the seal for a long time before he broke it. The wax came away with a little reluctant sigh. Robb's hand was large in the letters, confident, as if he knew the words would be read to men who would not see them. Theon read to the end before he let himself feel what it said. "Hold, my brother," Robb had written. It pleased Theon that the word did not feel like a crown but like a hand. "You do your house proud. They will sing this in my hearing and I will tell them to sing again. Keep Bran, keep Winterfell, keep yourself. If you must choose, choose Winterfell. If you must choose God, choose a God that lets you keep yourself. I march south again. They press us at the fords. If Ser Rodrik says yes with his eyes, believe him." "It's good," Theon said. He had to say something, or he would find himself silent in a way he did not want to explore. "You had expected it to be otherwise," Luwin observed. "I had not expected to be anything," Theon said honestly. "Expectation is a fancy that grows wherever you do not pull it up." He slept that night under a roof that had known worse winters than he had. He dreamed of Pike again, of the time he had climbed to the top of the seaward tower to prove a thing to a girl who would not be impressed. He had slipped, and the wind had not caught him, but the net had. As he dangled there, he had looked to the side and seen a gull squat on a stone with its mouth open as if laughing. In the dream, the gull's mouth was full of red leaves, and he woke with the taste of them on his tongue. He rose before the dawn could think to get up. He walked the yard while men snored and drooled and dreamed of warmer wives than any they'd see until spring. He stood in the godswood again, and the heart tree's eyes, the 1,000 in its flesh and the one it showed the world, did not flinch from him. "Well," Theon said, "here we are." He heard a step and did not turn. The step was careful not to make him jump. That was Luwin's particular. "Ser Rodrik would ask your leave to send men along the road to Torrhen's Square," Luwin said. "The ironborn might go that way to try to make a lesson of someone for the shame Winterfell laid on them. He says he will take the larger part of the garrison and return by the 7th day, if the roads hold." "Take them," Theon said. He thought for a moment. He saw Beth Castle's square, competent hands. He saw the net beside Mira's pallet. He saw Hodder's gentle smile and the way Rickon's scowl was a fragile armor around a heart that had not yet learned where to stand. "Leave me 30 and the wolves. Leave me heat. Leave me boys whose names I can call in the dark. That is all we have," Luwin said, which was his way of giving a blessing. The morning after Ser Rodrik left, the bastard of Bolton asked again for entry. He sent a man whose teeth were too regular for the north and whose hair sat too neat upon his head, as if he might be a barber's son. "My lord Ramsay would sup with you," the messenger said. "He would offer you meat seasoned with rare herbs." "We have meat," Theon said from the wall. "We have herbs too, common ones, better than rare because they are honest." "You refuse a lord who comes to aid you?" the messenger said. "The Dreadfort does not take slights lightly. The Dreadfort ought to take care when it offers help to a house that has not asked," Theon said. He kept his voice dry as wind through bare branches. If Lord Bolton himself wishes to enter Winterfell, he may. We will open for him. He may pass beneath our portcullis and knock upon our inner door. We will give him ale and call him friend. His bastard may stay in the yard and wait for his father like a well-trained dog. The messenger's face did something that asked to be called a smile and did not deserve it. You speak boldly for a kraken wearing a wolf's skin, he said. I speak as a man who stood a wall while other men slept, Theon answered. Take back the words. If your lord comes, we will receive him. If his get comes without him, we will receive him as he deserves. He half expected a blow. There are men whose hands fly before their minds do. But the messenger turned with a cat's neatness and went. Ramsay's camp stayed where it was. Theon did not trust the stillness, but he preferred it to the wrong sort of movement. He kept the watch doubled at the posterns. He kept the buckets fresh. He had Beth check the grain bins and count the rats they had caught. Where there are rats, he told her, there is food. Where there are cats, there are men who would rather not have rats. Bran grew quieter, as boys do when the adults about them fill a space with words. He spent more time with the Reeds, who had a way of letting a silence be itself rather than something to be filled, and with Osha, who taught him how to tie a knot that would hold for a day and how to tell when a piece of wood would burn quick or slow. Theon watched that and found it good. He did not seek to be anything like a father to the boys. He would be a wall that spoke to them when it had to and otherwise did what a wall does. That seemed to be enough. 3 days later, Ser Rodrik returned with men weary and 3 banners bent from wind and 2 wounded who would live and 6 who would not again wake to see a morning. They had not found ironborn at Torrens Square. They had found 2 burned farms and meat hanging in a smokehouse that had been cut down and eaten raw. They went inland, Ser Rodrik said, and his mouth flattened as if he would rather bite a cold coin than say the next. Or someone would have us think they did. Theon knew what that meant. Ramsay, he said. He is playing at something small and thinks it clever because it fits in his hand. We'll not give him our hand, Ser Rodrik said. He clapped Theon's shoulder, not unkindly. We'll send him away by boring him. He bores easily when he does not bleed, Theon said, and they both found that a little funny, and the laughter made them brothers for a moment. The days after had the slow, dangerous feel of glass cooling. Theon did not press. He wrote to Robb again, and the letter went like a blade that did not taste blood because there was none to take, and the raven left in a frost that made its wings glitter where a little sun found them. He slept some nights beneath the weirwood. He woke once to find Mira sitting with the net in her lap unthrown. You snore when you do not trust your breath, she told him solemnly. It wakes the fish. You can wake fish, he said gravely back. They are stupid things and sleep with their eyes open. Stupid things are sometimes gods, she said, equally grave, and it was a lesson and a joke. Theon thought sometimes of Pike in those days, as one thinks of the face of a woman who slapped you when you kissed her as a boy. There had been salt in his hair and a rope singed his hands, and he had been praised for being bold enough to do something any fool would do with a dare. He thought of Asha's face in the snow and of Dagmar's laughter without warmth, a noise that did not belong in winter, and he thought of the sound the ironborn had made when they fell off the wall into the night. They were not rain. He tried not to count them. He counted instead the men in the yard when he called them to drill, and the way Beth's hands could braid 3 ropes at once without looking, and how Rickon scowled, and how Bran smiled very carefully, as if smiles were something that needed to be set down and paid for with coin no one could see. One afternoon, as the sky was the color of old wool and the wind came shyly through the pines, a rider came hard up the road with a Manderley badge and an urgency that made the gate's bars seem a kindness when they came down to stop him from falling off his saddle. White Harbor, he cried, and then corrected himself, because the city was not in danger yet. A ship, a fleet, from King's Landing bearing Lannister colors and Frey with papers, and they are going north. To the Dreadfort first, the harbor master says, and then to Barrowton, and then to Winterfell, Ser Rodrik asked, calm as bread. No, the rider said, as if surprised anyone would guess a thing like that. To the twins. And then, the harbor master says, perhaps to a place where there is to be a wedding. Or a feast. Theon felt Luwin's gaze on him, steady and grave. He thought of Robb's letter and the word brother in it and the way the ink had sat heavy. He thought of Roose Bolton's absence from the siege. He felt in his mouth a taste like old iron. "Nothing certain," Ser Roderick said quietly, "but enough to mind. Enough to pray," Luwin said, and Theon could not tell if this was a man's humor or his despair. That night, Theon went again to the weirwood. He did not ask for anything. He stood and breathed and heard the sound the bark made in winter and the way the pools smoked like horses sleeping. He thought of the choice Robb had given him in the letter, "Choose Winterfell if you must choose." He thought of what it meant to be a wall that did not know its own name might give way because it would be listening for something else. "My name is Theon," he said to the mouth of the tree. "It is not any less true because there are two fathers who would like to claim it. It is not more true for that either. It stands, like this stone, like this place." The weirwood shed no leaves. It did not bleed new. It did not forgive him or ask him to take an oath more extravagant than the ones he had already said with his actions. Stood, and so did he. Morning came with a brittle sky. Men woke and cursed and laughed as men do in winter when their joints pass from pain into familiarity. Ramsay's camp was gone when they raised their heads above the outer walk. Only the gray ashes showed where he had been. The snow looked untouched by his feet as if he had walked on air. "Good," Ser Roderick said. "There is mischief enough in a winter. We do not need to import it." Theon stood long on the wall. He watched the river. He watched the far tree line. He could not help watching the road south again, though he saw nothing there but a line like a cut in a face. He thought of all the ways a thing could break. Loud with trumpets, soft with a whispered name, secretly, terribly, when a man turned to smile at a friend. He thought of boats and ropes and hooks and how the best you could do was cut the rope nearest your hand and watch the others and keep oil for where the spark would fall. Bran came up beside him later, walking because the steps were dry enough for a boy with a stubborn jaw. Hodder had his hands out just in case the boy's foot went wrong. Rickon came behind them with Snow at his heels, scowling as if he had invented the weather and was annoyed to find it used by others. The wolves paced at a slight remove, never out of the corner of vision, never gone. "It's quiet," Bran said. "For now," Theon agreed. "How long?" Rickon demanded, because that was the kind of knife he had and he enjoyed cutting with it. Theon looked at the gray of the day and the white on the pines. He looked at the stone his hand had warmed and the men whose names he could call without looking. He looked at the boy who would be lord and the boy who would be whatever storm would make of him. He looked at the weirwood that did not look back. "Long enough to learn something we have not learned yet," he said at last, and he did not try to make the answer wise. He went down then. There was work. There would always be work when a man had chosen to be a wall. He spoke to Beth about the cask set too near the heat. He had two of the yard boys scrape the rust from the old iron and oil it with pig fat. He asked Luwin to teach him how to read the little writing in the corner of the map of the Dreadfort lands, because he would not let ignorance be one of Ramsay's weapons. He watched Mira throw her net and bring up nothing and laugh and throw again. He listened to Jojen say nothing and tell him more than men who blustered. He trained with Ser Roderick until his arm sang and then was quiet. At dusk, he stood once more upon the wall and put his hand upon the notch where he had rested it the morning the ravens came. His fingers found it without looking. The stone held his hand as it had done before, cold and patient and not unkind. Winterfell breathed as a living thing does. He felt its breath go through him and become his own. He breathed in, then out, then in again. Behind him the pools smoked. Before him the north stretched and listened and knew his name, and did not need to say it aloud. He held. He had made a choice and this was the shape of it. The iron taste on the tongue, the slow, good ache in the arm, the knowledge of who would be kept safe behind him and who would not, perhaps, in days to come. He let the breath go and watched it thin like mist, and then he turned and went back down into his work. The days took on the taste of iron and ash and something simple as bread. It was not dullness, precisely, but a long, low note that found its own rhythm beneath the skin. Men grew used to the weight of mail, to the sound the gate made when it settled back into itself after being raised, to the way the ravens in the rookery argued as if they had opinions worth hearing. Theon learned the small heartbeats of Winterfell, how the brewhouse woke first, how the smoke from the glass gardens lay thin and then thick, how the kennels were loudest when the light like watered milk crept over the walls and every dog decided at once to tell the morning that it had been missed. The snow did not yet own the yard. It came and went like a woman who had not decided whether to forgive a man, laying itself down and then taking itself away again with a flounce of wind. Theon kept the men to drill, even when their breaths went in plumes that made the space between them seem crowded. He preferred the ring of wood to the clatter of steel. It taught the hands thrift and the muscles patience, and it left no shards to cut a careless boy's cheek. When they tired, he set them to work with ropes and pulleys to learn the ways weight could be tricked into doing what a man wanted. It pleased him more than it should to see the faces in the yard lift when he walked through it. He had no title to wear, nothing to drape over his shoulders that would declare him as the light in a window declares a hearth. He had only the things he did and what those things said about him. A man's work could be a cloak if he wore it long enough without shame. He bedded late and woke early and did not drink more than would wet his mouth. He ate what the men ate when he ate with them and something less than the boys when he took his food beside Bran. These were choices so small they felt like pebbles, but a castle was made of stones in the end. 3 mornings after Ramsay's camp burned itself down to cold ash without incident and puddles of grease, Theon found a pot of stew smoking into the air above the yard fire with a sweetness that did not belong to onion or oxtail. He lifted the lid and breathed, and there it was. Apple, sliced thin and set to cook with the bone. It was a White Harbor trick, Beth said when he turned his face toward her in question. My mother had it from a cousin who married south, and she swore it made poor meat behave as if it had been born a stag. If you keep soldiers on their feet, you must remember their tongues sit in their mouths like lords, she added, and that made the men within earshot laugh and do as she asked without being asked. A man came in with a look that was not laughter, and Theon felt his bones notice the change. Cooper's stall, the man said. Rats, bigger than the last, bold as priests. Rats are the politest thieves in a siege, Theon answered. They take only what will kill you slowly. He went himself and brought 2 boys with him and a shovel. They found the rats in the corner of the stall where the straw had been left damp. Theon lifted the boards while the boys stood ready with sacks and stones. The rats came like a fistful of negative space, a flurry of panic and teeth, and the boys squealed and did well all the same, their bodies remembering what their minds did not yet own. Theon took the last with his hand when it stuck, fat and entitled, inside a splintered bushel hoop. He snapped its neck and tossed it. Dry your straw, smell your barrels. If you can smell the ghost of beer in them when they're empty, you are feeding something that does not pay its rent, he told the cooper, who nodded with a humility that looked new on his face. He did the rounds of the walls with Ser Roderick at noon. They took the north face last because it had the habit of saving its opinion for when a man's back ached. The bastion stones there had a fine crust of ice, delicate as spun sugar, and Theon set his glove to it and came away cold. In the far distance, at the edge where the pines reached up like fingers, a line of crows rose and settled, as if the earth were breathing under them. There, he said, and Roderick turned his head the way a man turned a barrel to listen if it hid anything. Dead thing, the old knight said, or men who have made a dead thing to keep themselves warm. He rubbed his mustache and sent frost flying. Keep the watch doubled when the sun goes. Bad men like firelight when they come to take. It tells them where other men are least awake. Late in the day, Osha came back from the trees with a pine smell like a cloak around her and a small smile tucked in the corner of her mouth. Found 2 snares cut, she told Theon. Wire was good. Clean hands cut them. Not ironborn, not hunters. Men used to kitchen knives and careful work. Ramsay, Theon said without any heat in it. Or some lord's boy, Osha returned, not eager to make any man special who did not deserve it. Beans go missing in 2s, not bucketfuls. Someone counts the spoons and does not eat with them. Send Mira to lie a night there, Theon said. If an eel wants a hook, sometimes you give it one. Mira went with her net looped light over her shoulder, as if it had its own mind about where it wished to hang. She came back before dawn with snow in her hair and a look in her eye that said she had seen something she would like to set on a table. Theon met her in the shadow of the smithy, where the heat came faint through the wall like a cat rubbing your leg. "Two," she said. "Neighbors." They did not talk. One had hands like a weaver, soft in the wrong places, and the other smelled like a tanner under his cloak even though he wears soft leather and has no stains on him. They took the snares and left a dead rabbit to make it look like they were kind. "How do you know the smell?" Theon asked, which was not the question that mattered but was the one that came easiest. Mira smiled the way a girl smiles at a boy who has asked a question without shame. "Because my father once traded 3 eels for a tan boot he did not need. He kept the boot for a year to remind himself never to do that again. The smell will not leave my nose even when I am old." He sent 2 men to lie with Mira the next night, and he waited in the armor he wore when he wanted to feel his breath in his ribs. They caught the men just before the moon came fully up, when the world was in that soft gray where anything might be a lamb or a wolf. The men did not run. They put their hands up, palms ridiculous against the snow, and they smiled as if they had been caught at a game they could not explain and did not need to. One had a tanner's smell, and the other had that weaver's palm, and their eyes were wrong in their heads, not looking at what men looked at when they feared and not looking away when men were ashamed. "What are you called?" Theon asked, and the tanner smell said, "Ralph," without a beat out of place, and the other said, "Hark." And Theon thought that no man in the north would put such a neat, dull word on a boy and mean it. He took them to the guardroom and set them on the bench by the door and told Beth to bring them bread and something warm. He stood and watched them eat until they stopped noticing he was there. When their hands had found the pace they kept at home and their mouths had learned how to speak around hot crust, Theon set a cup on the table and asked Ralph to hand it to him. Ralph did, with his left hand, smooth as a downriver current. "Left-handed men rarely write a fine hand," Theon said mildly, and Luwin, who had come to stand in the doorway because he could not help trying to learn a thing even when it was not his to learn, made a little sound that could have been amusement. "I can write as any man," Ralph said, and boasted in his voice a little, as if this were a trick worth coin. Theon smiled. Hark's mouth did a small twitch and then went still, and that was the moment Theon felt the shape of their business. "You've a lord," Theon said, as if this were a gossip said between friends. "His house likes men who carry secrets in their sleeves. He does not like to pay them in coin because coin can be counted, but he pays them in skins and warm cloaks and small things that make a man proud of his own shadow." Hark looked at the table as if numbers might appear there. He had not been promised much, Theon reckoned. He had been promised the pleasure of knowing a thing other men did not and the right to smile quietly at supper when the talk was of horses or women. Such promises filled a man like bad stew. They left a heat in the belly and no strength in the legs. "I have no wish to flay your backs with questions," Theon went on, as if the word flay had not given both men's eyes a flicker. "If I ask a thing, it will be a thing a man can answer standing up. You will take this bread and my word. You will stay in the castle and you will do your work and you will tell me when you see a thing that does not belong. You will take no more snares. You will not carry a message in your mouth or hand to any man who will not show his bastard's name to the sky." Hark swallowed and the sound was a small creak of wood. "If we say no," he said, trying to make the words big, and they came out thin. "Then you go down to the dungeons," Theon said, and his voice did not do anything dramatic. "You will sit in the cold and think of the warmth you might have had with your own work. You will forget what the winter sun looks like between bars until you see it once and then never again. I will not cut you. I will not make a skirt of your skin. If you come back to me after that, you will come back with hands that know they can't be trusted." Ralph lifted his left hand again and let it hover for a moment. "We take your bread," he said. "We like our parts where they are." After they had been led away to work under Beth's eye, the cooper had room for them to scrape hoops and oil staves and be of use. Luwin leaned against the doorframe and watched Theon with that expression he had when a boy had learned a hard lesson and had hugged it instead of crying. "You make enemies gently," he observed. "I persuade friends without wine." Theon returned, and Luwin's mouth twitched. What if they are snakes and not rats? The maester asked. What if they bite because it is all they know? Then we'll learn to keep our boots on, Theon said. And we'll stamp. Snow came in earnest that night. It drifted down in flakes fat as feathers, the air full of them, so that a man could not walk 4 paces without feeling his eyebrows heavy. The pools steamed like a great beast's breath, and the rising warmth made little eddies in the falling flakes so that they seemed to shiver and then change their minds and climb back into the dark. Theon set men to clear the walkways and had the younger boys sweep the steps so the old had less to do. He took a broom himself and pushed with the rest. It mattered to him now that a man might see him with his hands on work that did not flatter. He did not think this would mend anything he had broken before in his life. He thought instead that the world was made of plain choices, and some of them were as simple as where you put your feet when there was ice. When dawn finally came, it came late and awkward, like a guest who had slept in the stable and did not wish to admit it. The yard was a white bowl. Men scraped paths through it that made lines like letters when Theon looked down from the wall. He found a satisfaction in the way the snow had laid one skin over all the castle. The well and the wall and the kennel roof and the broken lip of the old tower wore the same shift, and in how the men he named, the boys he knew by their runs and their laughs, left dark commas all through that whiteness. There was a rightness in seeing the mark of human living on the face of winter. Luwin would have said something about stewardship if asked. Theon said nothing and felt the weight of it settle without hurting him. Midweek, a fire took the thatch above the west parapet bakehouse. No more than a scarf of flame, but hot enough to bite if a man treated it like a toy. Theon heard the cry and came running, not like a lord but like a man who refused to let a thing get larger because someone had waited for another to do it. He had men already there. Beth with a chain of boys and buckets, Osha with a wet cloak she threw down over the worst, 2 of the garrison throwing ice like stones. He climbed the bakehouse ladder, though it was slick and willful, and he wanted to laugh because he had climbed worse ladders at pike with the sea pawing at him, and it had not taught him this caution then. He took the pike from the second man up and hissed him down with a look, and he jabbed at the burning thatch until it let go in clumps and fell into the yard to be stamped. When it was over, his beard was crisp at the ends, and his gloves smoked, and his forearm throbbed where the older cut resented the heat. They cheered without making a show of it, that low roll of sound that men make when they are telling one another they did not die of something ridiculous. Theon felt pride come and stand politely beside him. He did not send it away. He slept that night and dreamt of boats making their slow, scraping way over snow instead of water, the shells sewn into Asha's braids tinkling their small tin song. The dream went on until it forgot it was a dream, and he woke with the sound in his ears and the steady, patient weight of the castle above him and nothing else. Letters came and went. Ravens can make a man feel that the world is smaller than it is. They bring another man's breath to your face and ask you to pretend this is the same as his presence. Theon read Robb's words again until he could have put them back into the wax one by one. He gave Luwin words to send in return. He made them plain and unromantic, and he hid no privation, and he asked no hero's part. He told Robb he would hold. He told him Ramsay would not be made welcome beyond the yard until his father came with him. He told him the ironborn had been sent off not with arrows in their backs but with Winterfell's self-respect kept whole, and that mattered more than the pleasure of killing hungry men when they retreated. He told him he would keep the boys and the bricks and the bread. He sent the letter away and watched the raven take the air and felt the piece of himself go with it. A week after the fire, a headless sheep was found neatly set upon the lip of the hot pools, as if a man had been careful to keep the fleece from the water. His neck had been cut clean. Its body was not bled. It had been placed, not drained. Men spoke of it as if it were a joke until they realized no one was laughing in a way that could be used to keep fear from their teeth. Theon went to look at it with Osha and Mira, because the 2 of them had eyes that did not set to fancies when simplest truths sat under their noses. They stood in the steam and the white and looked at the headless thing. Hunters bleed their kills, Osha said. Butchers, too, if they're not soft. This is a priest's work, but not one of mine. Look at the cut, Mira said, setting a finger near without touching.
No sewing.
A sharp knife drawn once. The hand that did it knows how to take a throat without making a mess. A lord's boy, Theon said, or a squire with a talent, or a bastard with a lesson. They disposed of the animal in the way Luwin dictated, salt and fire and a quiet longer than usual in the kitchens, so that the girls could tell one another once and only once, and not make a festival of it. Theon set extra men around the pools for 3 nights. On the second, they caught a shape moving. It was a boy, no more than 15, with his hair tied back like a small lord's and a small knife in his sleeve that would have emptied a man in the right hands. "Who sent you?" Theon asked after they had taken the knife and found nothing else on him but pride. The boy said no one, and then said everyone, and then said the old gods, and then said a name that did not belong to any house Theon knew. A thing said by a mouth that had never had to work for anything beyond finding the taste of an apple sweet. They set him to dung duty for a month and made certain every man knew why. It was a small justice, and one that meant the talk would be of Theon's patience and not of a flayed boy's skin hung like a banner. He worried at the thought of Bolton because it was a worry that would not wear out. Roose stayed gone, though men came through with stories as men always did. He was at the Fords. He was at the Twins. He was in 2 places at once because the man was more shadow than flesh. He was nowhere because he had never been born. Theon tried to care only for what a man's hands had done, and hands had not been seen here with Bolton's ring upon them, save Ramsay's briefly and without permission granted. One cold afternoon, while the men worked at the Scorpion, greasing the axles as if they oiled a thing with feelings, Ser Rodrik asked Theon to walk the gods' wood with him. Theon did. It was a place that taught men how to finish a thought. The great heart tree's bark looked almost brown with the wet, a deep marred red that made it seem to pulse if a man looked too long. They stood in the steam and the breath of the trees. Ser Rodrik's beard had ice in it. When the old knight spoke, his voice came as if from a well. "I knew your father," he said, and Theon knew the old man was not seeking to hurt him. He heard in the words the carefulness of a man placing weights one by one on a scale. "Not well. A glance's worth. He has a way of making men feel their feet too long or their hands too clean. You have had that look upon you since you were a boy. It has gone." Theon considered the face in the bark and thought of his own, which he saw only in water or in polished metal, never in any calm that did not tremble at the edges. "Perhaps I've learned to walk in boots that fit," he said. "Perhaps winter makes men find their true size." "There will be a choice," Ser Rodrik said, turning his head to watch a red leaf drift where no leaf should float. "Not the one you've already made. Another. It will come when there are men near you who think they have already made one for you. I am an old man, Theon, and I like to kill my fancies while they are small. I would tell you to trust your stubbornness when it comes. That's all." "Stubbornness?" Theon smiled without letting the smile reach his eyes. "I thought you were going to say honor. Honor sits well on a man who has bread and sleep and no one asking him to be clever," Ser Rodrik said. "Stubbornness is for when you've a knife at your back and a pot boiling over and a child crying, all at once, and you must decide which thing to let burn and which to save and which to silence. Honor is a feast word. Stubbornness keeps brown bread on the table." Theon nodded and did not pretend to be wise, and that felt like a kind of wisdom he had not owned when he had been younger and loud. The small crisis came when the river thought to make a fool of them. A thaw followed by a freeze, the water's practice of cruelty. Ice shoved against the stone where the castle's foundations had once thought the river a friend. In the night, the sound came like a huge beast grinding its teeth. In the morning, there was a crack a man could set his hand inside and lose it. Theon had the men out with straw and wood to burn and the lamplighters' buckets to pour and the smiths' heavy sledges for when heat and water would not do. They made a business of it, men laughing as men do when work is dangerous enough to give their lungs purpose. They melted the ice under the wall and eased the river's temper, and then they set the cracks with oak wedges and packed snow and then good gray clay from the pit beyond the armory. It was ugly, but ugly holds, Luwin said, and Theon remembered his words later in the week when an arrow stuck in his arm brace and did not reach the meat because a tanner had made it too thick and ugly by half. Ironborn were not gone entirely. Any sea will toss back what you forget you threw in. A pair of longships made a slapdash try at the river bend one morning when the sky was so white the boats looked like drawings on a page a child had rubbed half away with a greasy finger. They came in crooked, their shields hooped to their sides, men at the oars with bodies that did not like the rhythm the river asked of them. Theon had the Scorpion hauled and cocked, and Beth sighted it like a woman doing the careful work of threading a needle. The bolt took the first boat low, through plank and thin ice and meat. The boat groaned as if it had learned to speak, and then it went in, lovers slow. The second boat pinwheeled and caught its cousin a hurtful kiss. Men shouted with that sound men make when they mean to be brave and are very surprised. Osha's two best archers plucked the air without haste and sent their little iron thoughts out to meet the world, and the world answered as it usually does. The second boat scraped free and drifted with two oars working pointless as beetles' legs. They did not send men out in pursuit. It is a pleasure to chase, but it is a better pleasure to know you have eaten and will eat tomorrow also. After, Theon walked the wall with Mira and looked at the water where the first boat had gone. A gray scarf of bubble and broken wood had been caught in a back eddy. It turned and turned like a thought a man cannot let go. Mira's net hung quiet on her shoulder. "Sometimes it is hard not to throw," she said, a little rueful. "Sometimes it is hard not to dive," Theon answered, and for a moment, without looking at him, she understood precisely everything he had said. The ravens came thin for a while, then thick, then thin again. There are seasons in letters, too. One bore a blotted hand that was not Robb's, though it spoke his voice. It told of Fry. It told of Guestright disgust with the weight it deserved. It told of a union meant to be bomb upon a scab men would not stop picking. Theon read it twice and then a third time and then folded it and set it back into the tube and set the tube on the table as if it were a small stone he needed to remember not to kick. He said nothing to Bran that night. He spoke instead of the way the wind changed the taste of the snow when it came from the east. Bran listened and nodded once, and later Theon found him in the Godswood with Summer's head on his knee, his hand doing that small, careful stroke that told a beast without words that a boy's heart needed holding. On the fourth day before the moon turned, men came from the Hornwood levies, gray with hunger and pride. Their captain had a name Theon had to ask thrice to keep in his head: Hardy Jack or Jack Hard or Jace Hardly. Something with a joke wrapped round a man who did not look like he joked much. They had taken a clutch of ironborn and sent them south chained to a cart. "For Ser Helman's pleasure," the captain said dryly. "There's a man who likes to see things neat." Theon gave them bread and ale and a warm corner and did not ask them to drill, though he wanted to see how their feet sat. There is a point at which a man becomes a steward rather than a petty general, and Theon entertained the thought that he might live long enough to cross it. The quiet did not break. It frayed at the edges. It took on the feeling of a cloth that had been worn and turned and worn again. The boys grew a little taller. Rickon Scowl learned how to be used for comedy, and sometimes he made the girls in the kitchen laugh and then grow quiet because laughing in winter felt like cheating. Bran's eyes went further away when he looked at nothing in particular, and when he brought them back they were full of a calm that made Theon want to speak to him softer than he would have. Mira taught Theon to throw the net in the Godswood pool where the water ran shallow and the fish lived because they had not learned any better. He was poor at it and laughed at himself and then learned not to step on the net as he threw it. That improved matters. Once, the net settled clean and lifted full and the fish went to the air with the sound of rain, and Theon's hands learned in an instant to be gentle and greedy at once, spilling and taking. "You have a talent," Mira said, and he snorted because men who have never learned to be praised without flinching will make a joke of it even to their own hearts. A small thing. The baker's youngest burned his hand on an iron and did not cry. He held it in the snow and watched it steam and said, very seriously, "I won't touch a hot thing again until I forget how this feels." Theon laughed and then did not. He saw in the boy what Winterfell did to men. It taught them the price of a lesson and how to keep the receipt. Then, as if the world had remembered it had a schedule it had been ignoring, the letters changed their breath. 2 ravens in one day from the south, one from a man with a neat hand and a mind too neat to have written what it did without pain. The union at the Twins had been a poor thing, the food had been good, the music better, the knives best of all. The other letter was broken and jagged, and though it had the seal, it did not have the trick of Robb's words. said little, said enough. It said the Riverlands were a bowl knocked from a table and everyone chased the pieces and no one saved the stew. Theon read alone in the tower with Luwin standing very near. The brazier had burned down to a red, steady anger, and the wind tried the panes the way a child tries a lock he has not been given leave to touch. Theon's hand did not shake. It had learned not to. His jaw set and he placed the letters side by side as if they were two brothers who had not liked each other and were obliged to share a bench. Luwin said nothing. The chain at his throat rattled once and then decided it did not wish to speak either. Theon looked out at the yard as if the yard would give him any answer he was owed. Boys ran, men walked, breath went into winter and winter ate it. He felt a tightness pass through him, an arrow of thought. It lodged and became a truth. He went down into the yard and did not call the men to him in a show. He went to Beth and told her to set aside a measure of grain and salt meat to be taken to the crofts beyond the walls by men with eyes that would not go to sleep at the first fire they saw. He told Osha to find 6 who would walk at night and listen to what the trees wanted to say about horsemen traveling fast. He told Ser Roderick what the letters had said and stood and let the night of that news pass over the old man's face. Roderick bowed his head a moment as if he had been asked to receive a crown he knew would break his neck. "So," he said, "our work does not change. Our work changes only at the ends." Theon agreed. "Not in the middle. We will do the middle until we are stopped." They set the boys to carrying wood, because a boy will always do better for having a thing in his hands. They set the men to mending net and strap and to oiling leather, because oil has a way of making a man calm when used right. Theon walked the walls twice that day and then twice again, and when he had done he went to the godswood and stood in the breath of the tree and said without any poetry, "Keep me where I need to be and not where my pride would have me," because he had learned that a man can sometimes ask the world for the smaller thing and be likelier to receive it. Night came with its usual insolence and its usual gifts. The pools smoked. The wolves hunted their own shadows for an hour and then lay and slept with the sort of trust that would have been a kindness if men had learned it. Theon did not sleep much. He sat with Luwin and Ser Roderick and Beth and Osha and Mira and Jojen and 2 others whose names he had learned in the past month with a trueness that meant he would not forget them even if they died where he could not see. They spoke without drama. "Fry will think himself a king if no one shows him the smell of his own breath," Beth said, and Jojen looked at her with that solemn surprise boys have when a woman says a thing that sounds like a priest has said it in a nicer room. "Fry will think nothing," Osha said. "Freys breed like rabbits and die like rabbits and eat their young if winter comes and they have miscounted. They won't come here unless they have been told they can collect teeth. If Bolton thinks he can be the man to hand them a purse, he will slip on his own shadow and break his neck. Ramsay thinks with his knives," Theon said. "We'll let him think without our doors open to him." Luwin added, "If Robb is, if his host is," and could not say it plain, his learning failing him where it always would, in the face of meat turning into memory. "Then his mother's house is, then Edmure, then. We are what we are," Ser Roderick said gently, and set his hand on the maester's wrist as if to quiet the chain that made him heavy. Theon looked at Bran asleep in his chair by the fire, his face soft in a way it rarely was now, and at Rickon curled with Shaggy Dog like a knotted rope, and at Hodder sitting with his back to the wall and his eyes gone soft with the watch that was his to keep. He breathed in, he breathed out. He let the breath go as if letting a bird out of a snare, in no hurry to see if it would fly or fall. At dawn they rang no bell. Sometimes sound is a gift to the enemy. Sometimes silence is your friend. Theon walked the walls and found the world still there. The men on the east tower were pale and stubborn. They had watched a light moving through the trees for an hour before deciding it was only the last star refusing its work. Theon went down to the yard and called for boys to fetch the bundles the women had made in the night. Cloth sewn with dried beans and salt and wrapped small enough to be tucked beneath a cloak. He gave them to the old men who would walk to the crofts, and he put a hand to each man's sleeve. Not a blessing, not quite. A weight which is the same thing by another name. 2 days later, a rider came from the Bar Rolands bearing a flag so dirty Theon could not tell what it had once wished to be. He rode a horse that had been ridden too far for anyone's honor. the beast's sides covered in salt where sweat had dried and been wetted and dried again. The rider himself swayed as men sway when their bodies have decided to do the work their minds have long since abandoned. "From Lady Dustin," he said in a voice that belonged to a younger man. "Bolton moves. Fry scatters like starlings flung at in a yard. The twins shut their gates and have begun to bake their bread without witnesses." He swallowed. She says, "Keep your hearth and don't let any man shame you into opening it for his hands to warm." Theon gave him a place to lie down and a cup of something warm with spice in it, because there is a kindness that costs little and keeps a man honest. He sent a raven to Barrowton that said, as simply as he could make it, "We hold. If you can send us rope, send rope." Men always ask for swords because it gives them stories to tell. Rope saves your life and gives no tale to brag upon. As the rumor of ruin unrolled across the north like a bad blanket, men began to come to Winterfell not to fight but to be kept. The castle could not take them all. A lord who overfed his own house to let others sit by his fire would soon have no fire and no house. Theon took the hard look. He sent some away, good men with good eyes and hands and children at their backs. He sent them to White Harbor, to Barrowton, to the mountain fastnesses where a cow living meant a family did also. He gave them tokens carved roughly from the wood in the carpenter's shed, the grain still proud beneath a knife's quick truth. A wolf's head, a knot, a simple line. "Show this to the man at the gate," he said. "Tell him Theon Greyjoy told you where the stew pot sits." Some looked at the name and some at the token and all at the man saying it, and they went with the kind of gratitude that does not melt and run but sits in a man's heart like a warm stone for later. Bran watched and learned with a stillness that made men better because they felt a pair of eyes upon them that had no malice in them and no particular desire either. He asked questions that made Theon blink. How many loaves the ovens could make if men worked with the moon as their lantern. How many arrows a boy could fletch in a day if he were hungry and promised his dinner if he finished early. How many paces from the gate to the first place a man from the outside might hide if he wished to shoot a watchman who had not yet learned to be careful. Theon answered when he could and said, "I don't know," when he could not. Bran seemed pleased by both. In a world that had begun to go wrong noisily and often, small joys presented themselves with the clarity of a bright pebble in snow. Rickon and Shaggy Dog discovered a way up into the inner hall rafters that made Osha swear like a woman who had found a new religion. Theon laughed until he remembered the world, and then laughed again because remembering the world could not be the end of laughter forever. Luwin found a misplaced page in one of the old histories that spoke of a winter where the snow had come sideways and men had been found frozen standing because they had not moved in time. He read it aloud by the fire in the evening, and his voice had the gentle pride of a man who has found a fact he can polish like a coin and show to tame a boy's fear. Mira set her net on the wall and let the wind take its edge and told the boys how to read the drift of a thing by how it pulled at their fingers, and one of the boys, who would never be good at sums, showed her a trick with twine that made the net pick itself into a new pattern like a song-changing key. Theon wrote another letter. He did not know to whom at first. He set the page and the ink and the quill and sat with them until the stone of the tower found where his spine needed to lean. In the end, he wrote to Asha. He wrote nothing that would be used to hurt a man. He wrote everything that would hurt her if she read it with the part of her that had not forgotten sandwiches stolen as children and laughter that had not needed knives in it. He told her he had stood on the wall and said no. He told her he had eaten bread with boys whose fathers had taught them to spit and had not taught them when to stop. He told her she had a scar that ran under her hair like a hidden path, and he hoped she did not forget it was there. He did not send the letter. He tore it, then did not. He folded it and tucked it into the lining of the jerkin he wore when he meant to be the man he had become. He dreamed again of the weirwood and of its mouth moving. This time, when it asked a name, he said only Theon. The tree did not answer, which had become, he realized, a mercy. The next blow came in morning clothing, at a time men were not ready to be struck. The watchman on the east tower saw strangers on the road and did not call alarm because he saw no banners and no weapons raised. There were 3 carts, one with a broken wheel jounced along by 2 men with chapped hands. There were women on the second cart with their hair tied in the fashions of the bar Rolands. There were children in the third, tight and quiet. The gate stayed closed because gates are not opened for anyone in winter unless a man with a name says so. Theon went to the parapet to look down upon them. He felt the weight behind his eyes of a choice a man hates because it is between the hard and the hard. The man who raised his eyes to him from the cart with the broken wheel had a face like a loaf left too long in the oven. It was made of crust. He raised a hand without fear, not a plea but a greeting. "From the Lady of Barrowton," he called without drama. "She gives us to you because her place is not as warm and her stores not as deep." "What do you bring?" Theon asked, not to be cruel but because a man must always ask what he is taking into his house. "Hands," the man said simply, "and 2 boys who can run with words, and a woman who knows how to make cheese that does not turn, and a litter with a man who has seen too much. That last is a burden, we admit it. Lady Dustin said you would take the burden if you took the rest." "Who is the man?" Luwin asked at Theon's elbow, as if the answer might change the weight of the world. The man on the cart turned his head and Theon's breath went small and sharp. It was Reek, the Reek, not in name but in the stink of him and the way his eyes moved without any wish to look at what they saw. Not the same man. Theon knew the first had died as all men like that die, in a ditch or a dream. This one had the brand the world had given him written without iron or flame. His hands were wrapped because there was nothing else to do with them. He looked at the gate as if it would bite him. "Who is he?" Theon asked. "Ramsay's man," the cart driver said in a voice with no desire to be heard by anyone else. Or was, before he smelled himself. He ran and was caught and ran again. He is good at running. He does not want to die. That is his only talent. Lady Dustin thought you might find a use for a man whose only talent is to run away in the right direction when told. Theon's mouth tasted of iron. He wanted to laugh and he wanted to spit and he wanted to curl his hand into a fist and feel it hurt. He did none of those. He said, "Open." Slowly. He made himself watch the gate lift and made himself feel what this meant. It meant more mouths and more hands and more stories, and one story he did not want to hear. It meant the world had come to the edge of Winterfell with a stink and a lesson and the courtesy of not hiding either in clean clothes. They took the carts in. The women went quiet at once into the kitchens as women do. They set themselves to finding out who needed telling where to put his bowls. The boys ran and were set to running in the right direction. The man on the litter did not look up even when moved. He made a small sound like a dog that has been promised a beating later and has learned to believe it. Theon did not speak to him. He did not need his voice to know that language. "Bad meat," Osha said in his ear. "Even when you cut away the worst, something of it gets into the stew. Every stew with meat in it has a bad bit," Theon answered, surprising himself with the steadiness in his tone. "We'll keep that piece near the bottom of the pot and never ladle from there without thinking." He had Luwin take the man to the farthest cell where the stone sweats in any weather and the rats come only if a man leaves slop near the door. He told the maester, "Treat him like a man you would not allow near a boy," and Luwin nodded once with a severity that did not look ridiculous on him, which is a rare thing in a maester. Theon told the guards, "Do not speak to him like you would to a dog. Do not speak to him like you would to a lord. Do not speak to him unless you must. I will speak to him when I have learned what his eyes do when he hears someone laugh." He did not explain. Men obey better when a thing sounds like wisdom, even if it is only a precaution said in a voice that knows its own mind. That night, snow came again, sly and then sure, and the wind found every place a wall had a seam. Theon walked the galleries with a hood and a lantern and the steady foot of a man who knows the stone as if it were a person he had chosen to love. He looked in on Bran and saw the boy's face in the lamplight, eyes not closed though sleep had him by the shoulders. He thought the eyes were seeing not the room but something that sat inside him, a place with no walls and many trees. He thought of saying the boy's name and did not. He walked on. He paused above the dungeons. He did not descend. He had made a practice these past weeks of not doing everything a man could do simply because he could do it. He could speak to the man who had called himself Reek once, or the world had called him that. He could interrogate him and pretend he was any different from Ramsay while doing it. He could be clever. He could be cruel. He could be merciful wrongly, the worst cruelty. He did none of these and went on, and put his hand where it belonged on the crease of stone he had begun to call his. Morning brought a piece of luck dressed in rags. A hunter from the wolfswood came in with a stag haunch across his small sled. A thing he had no right to have taken in a winter that had not yet given anyone permission to be bold. He had eyes like flint and a tongue that did not bother with stories that might have gotten him praise. "Found it dead," he said. "Wolves took the first bite. I took the second." He looked at the walls with the evaluation of a man who judged them as a possible enemy and a possible friend. Saw freemen in the trees. Not ironborn, not Bolton. Men with no badge and a set of shoulders like thieves. They were watching the road and laughing at a joke I couldn't hear. "Thieves laugh to show their teeth work," Theon said. "We'll set men to watch the watchers." He fed the hunter and sent him away with a token for Barrowton, because it never hurt to have a man with eyes like that owe you something small. He had Beth set aside the haunch for a feast not of joy but of gratitude, and he told her, "We will sit and eat with all the names in our mouths. It will do us good to say them like prayer and not like mourning." The feast was small. It made no brags. The meat was not much, and there was a stew that had more onion in it than anyone who liked meat would prefer, and there was bread so dark it shone in the light like a well. Men ate with that seriousness soldiers have when the food is not meant to be remembered later as anything but a proof they were alive. Theon sat beside Bran and across from Ser Roderick and listened to Beth tell a story about a boy in the kitchens who had tried to steal a pie and had discovered that a pie will burn you worse than any log because you think you can carry it in your hands like a tame thing. Men laughed and then stayed quiet, and then someone began a song in a voice that had been made to sing old songs, and the words came like a snowy road, even and without ornament. After, Theon went to the dungeons. He took no guards and then changed his mind and took one. Not because the man behind the door frightened him. Men like that lost their power when you looked at them from the right height. No, because the guard needed to see him go and return. Needed to see that the lord of this place did not keep the bad meat private. Did not keep secrets with it. They went down together, their breath showing them the steps before their feet did. Theon stopped at the door and said to the guard, "If I do not leave when your thoughts say I should, come in. Do not apologize." He opened the door and stepped into the smell. It was not foul, not the way a place is foul when everything is wrong in it. It was simply wrong in another way, a human wrongness, skin and fear and an old stew of humiliation. The man was sitting with his back to the wall like a schoolboy. He lifted his eyes and they were that same wrong color, a color of nothing, a water with no fish in it. "What do the dogs call you?" Theon asked conversationally. The man's mouth made a shape like a name, then did not say it. He was clever enough to know names had power. He was not clever enough to know that power had gone out of him and into the winter some time ago. "Whatever you like," he said. "My lord." "I am not your lord," Theon said. "I am Winterfell's wall. I am the man you don't go around. That is different." He leaned against the cold stone opposite and let the man see him not mind the chill. "If I asked you to run, would you go where I told you?" The man's eyes flicked. A dog being beaten flinches in the same way when a hand only moves to scratch. "If there was anywhere else to go, I would go there," he said honestly enough that Theon felt his own mouth lose its contempt. "Men like me run to the worst places first because we know they will take us in. You could give me clean bread and a clean shirt and I would wear them until men saw me and knew me again and stripped them from me. This is the truth." "It is," Theon allowed. "But there is another truth. Men like you sometimes run where men like you are not expected to go, and the surprise is useful to those who want better than this." He looked past the man at the wall that sweated and thought of the river. "You have been close to Ramsay Snow." The man's tongue touched his teeth as if to check they were all there. "Closer than his shirts," he said. "Closer than the skin he wants to wear. I am what he pulls on when he wants to pretend he is not himself, and no man should be himself when he thinks he is what he is." "He sent you to Winterfell," Theon said, "to open a door. Or to call a name in the night that would send a man with a lantern where you could find him with your knives. Or to make us pity you and bring you near so the smell of you could cover the smell of what is behind you. The man looked at him with something like admiration. "You will not dress a wound with a dirty cloth," he said. "You will wait until the clean cloth comes, and you will let the wound bleed until it is ready." Theon did not flinch or allow his hands to tell stories before his words did. "You are not clean. You are not honest. You are not brave. You are useful." He paused, tasted the word. Possibly. A flicker. Not hope. Interest. Men like this live by interest like mice live by crumbs. "You will write," Theon said. "A letter to your master. I will put the words in your mouth and you will spit them at the page and I will make you swallow the taste of them. You will tell him there is rot in this wall and that you can climb it if he gives you 2 nights without moon and men who do not breathe loudly. You will tell him, we eat more bread than we have and we argue over small fires and there is shouting at night. You will tell him I have begun to call myself Lord and that no one likes it. You will tell him there are boys who hunt without their wolves. You will lie like a man who does not know how to tell the truth even when he has been given the gift of it." The man smiled without moving his mouth. "And then," he said, "and then I will tell him something in your words that is true," Theon said. "I will tell him that the gate does not open for you when you come. That will be true. It will never open. He will make a plan in which the gate must open. He will come to it. He will lay hands on the place that cannot be moved. He will show me where the knife will go when it goes in for the others. I will mark that place for later." The man's shoulders moved as if a bird had landed on them. Theon wondered briefly if this was how patience looked on him to others. "And me?" the man asked lightly. "What do I get?" "You get to live in a place where the food is hot and the floor is dry for as long as you do the work of being a warning to me," Theon said. "When I forget what men like you make possible for men like him, I will come and look at you. You will remind me not to open doors. This is a gift you will give me every day." The man's eyes went to the wall and then back. "I can do that," he said. "I am good at reminding men." They wrote the letter. Luwin watched with his chain in his fingers as if it were a rosary. Theon dictated in a voice that did not find pleasure in the cleverness and therefore kept its honesty. The man wrote with a cramped hand that had not put ink to paper often. When it was done, Theon sealed it with the ring he wore, the direwolf done in wax without flourish. He held it a moment. "You will not carry it," he told the man. "You will tell me the back path he expects you to take. Then you will sleep and I will send it my way. Then we will watch and we will count his nights." He left the cell and breathed the air in the stair that smelled only of men's feet and fire. He found himself smiling because he had been cruel and this cruelty was gentler than many. Beth crossed his path at the bottom of the stairs with a basket of small loaves and looked at him as if she knew what he had done without caring. Because bread must be baked whether a lord has been clever or not. The traps they laid were not the sort that would be sung about. No pits with stakes. No nets in trees to snatch heroes from their saddles. Osha set 3 bells to a single catgut string that ran along the inner parapet where a man would not tread unless he thought no one would notice him. Mira laid a net flat and sprinkled it with ash and then snow so that any man stepping there would be taken at the ankle for a heartbeat and stumble. Just enough to shift the night's language to one Theon's men spoke. Theon had ladders lifted from where they had lived for 100 years because a man will expect the obvious ladder and not the one carried by 3 boys who look like they are playing. He set archers not on the highest places but on the second highest because it is from there you see the angle a climber prefers. He had men piss on the steps where the ice did not wish to leave because men will not fall where they have marked the world with their own bodies. He told no man he would be praised for doing his work well. He told them he would be remembered and their names would be said to the boys. It amounted to the same thing in a winter. 3 nights later, the bells sang softly, a whisper of tin. The net lifted and a man cursed in a dialect that had too much silk in it for the north. The archers loosed not in a rush but in a patient rhythm that made the night sound like a loom. A shape fell and did not cry out because it had practiced not crying out. A second shape slipped and caught at the wrong thing and the bell sang louder. Osha's knife said good evening and then good night. Theon did not draw his bow. He walked instead along the wall and listened to the men do what they had learned to do, and he learned what his place felt like when he allowed other men to fill it well. They took one alive, because men always do when a plan has been laid with a place for a live mouth. He had a scar that no northerner would own with pride, a neat white line made by a blade sharpened in a warm room. He called himself no name and kept his mouth shut until Beth came and set a cup of hot ale on the table and said, "Drink, or spill it on yourself and learn to scream." He drank. He said a name, one that fit nowhere into any story the North had told itself in 100 years. It was a Fry Cousins man, hired to make trouble cheaper than an army. "They sent us to make you grow thin with watching," the man said, almost apologetic. "We are not meant to take anything, just peck." There was something pathetic in his shrug. The North did not understand the virtue men found, south of the neck, in irritating an enemy until he made a fool of himself. "Peck somewhere else," Theon said, and had the man tied and sent south with a guard to Barrowton. Let Lady Dustin pluck the man for herself. There was a delicacy in that kindness. There was no news from Robb, and that itself was news. The silence grew and got its own weight. Theon did not try to break it with good words. He let the men tell their own stories. He made sure the stories they had to tell were of small victories. The rat caught, the rope mended, the boy who slipped on the west stairs and did not die because Hodder's hand was there before his head found the edge. He kept the old men busy with counting. He kept the young boys busy with carrying. He kept Bran busy with listening to the shape of Winterfell's breath. The boy was better at it than any man. He would lean his head toward a wall and say, "There," and Luwin would put his ear in the same place and hear nothing but stone. But later, when the mortar had been smoothed, when the draft had been found and cut off, when a door had been made to shut without the cry of a hurt hinge, Luwin would find Bran in the Godswood and say thank you without words, which the boy accepted as if he had been born to it. On a day when the wind had grown bold enough to strip the warmth from a man's chest through his clothes, a band of hill men came in from the west with their ponies and their cold eyes. They had fought for Robb down in the Riverlands and had found that the South was not made for men who preferred to sleep under rock and sky. They spoke to Beth and not to Theon at first because Beth had a face that told men they would eat if they did as she said, and Theon liked that more than if they had sought his eyes first. They brought with them a story of Bolton men marching quickly and then not marching at all, of Freys making tall talk and then making none, of red upon snow and men who had learned to see it as something that could be ignored if you wanted to get through the day. "You'll have trouble from that bastard," their leader said without respect or any wish to learn it. "He likes the taste of men. He's not his father. His father can put his face down on a table and make it smooth. The boy has teeth and thinks the world is meat." "He has tried," Theon said simply. "He found the wall not to his liking. He went away." "Men like that do not go away," the hill man grunted. "They draw a circle with their hands and call it a plan. One day you'll wake up and you'll be inside it." "We will wake," Theon said, "and we will bring a knife to cut the circle." The hill men laughed with that unpleasant satisfaction men have when they think your death will be interesting. They took salt and bread and left, and Theon watched them go with neither regret nor fear. The North held many sorts, and not all of them knew the castle would stand whether it was interesting or not. Theon's sleep grew less clean. He did not dream of drowning now. He dreamed of standing and not moving even when the water rose to his chest, to his mouth, to his eyes. He would wake and move his fingers and say each finger's name. The boy had taught him this, Rickon with his superstitions, thumb, pointer, long man, ring man, small man, and then he would know where he was. It would take less time each night. It was a kind of victory he kept private. He went once to the smithy and stood with Micken's successor, a boy from the White Knife with arms that still remembered rope more than hammer, and watched him draw out iron slowly. It was a relief to watch a thing become what it should be, ache by ache. The heat on his face felt like forgiveness. The boy hit the iron and it changed not at once but stubbornly, the way a man changes if given reason and held to it. Theon thought of himself then, and of all the jokes he had made at his own expense to keep other men from doing it, and he leaned into the heat and was grateful for every scar it did not leave. In the end, the signs arrived the way winter signs do, small and then suddenly everywhere. 3 ravens one morning, then 5 that afternoon. Men riding hard from the riverlands, not to Winterfell but past it. The look of men who had seen big things and now wanted small ones to hold. Ramsay's camp came back, and not as a camp. His men were seen in the trees with no fires, their cold a choice. Theon did what he had done for weeks. He set lines, he checked lines, he placed a hand on stone and allowed his name to be Theon and Winterfell's. He did not try to make drama out of any of it. Drama kills. Routine saves. When the blow finally fell, it did not come from where he had thought to have his head turned. It came from the inside of his chest, from the moment Luwin walked into the yard with a letter in his hand and his face carefully quiet. The wax was phrased blue-gray. The hand was neat, not fretted. The words were simple, like a man who had discovered after many years that lies were costly and truth was cheaper when you wished a thing to be believed. They said what the songs would say, only with less music and more meat. Robb had been cut down and his men with him in a place that had promised to feed them. It was worse than that and less. It was everything and only what it was. Theon read and did not blink. His body did the work of being a man in front of other men. He nodded to Luwin and handed the letter back and had it placed under a weight on the table like bread. He looked up and across the yard and found Bran's eyes. The boy did not come to him. You do not go to a man with a letter in his hand and take him by the arm. You wait for him to come to you if he wishes. Theon went. He knelt because it seemed proper to let the boy be higher, for once and for always. Bran's voice was not a child's. It was not a lord's either. It was a boy's voice in winter. "We hold," he said. "We hold," Theon answered. He rose and went to Ser Roderick and put a hand on the old man's shoulder and felt the tremble there and did not pretend not to. He went and found Beth and told her the oven would have to be lit longer tonight because men would eat and eat until they felt ill and then feel something like relief and then sleep, and this was a good thing to happen in a castle in a winter in a world that had put a knife into a feast. He told Osha to keep the boys close and the wolves closer. He told Mira to set her net where a man would not expect it. He did not go to the dungeons. He did not need to look at the man there to know what use he would be in days to come. At dusk, the bells did not ring. Men came to the walls without being called, as men do when their hearts are too full of nothing. Theon stood on the east parapet with the wind in his face and the smell of snow like clean cloth. He put his hand upon his notch in the stone and felt the cold find his palm and then become part of it. He looked south and saw nothing, and north and saw nothing, and west and east, and saw the world as it had been and as it was going to be. He heard the wolves sing then, not because anything had happened, but because wolves sing to remind themselves they are not alone when the dark remembers their names. The sound went through the men and then up into the stones, and the stones gave it back like a promise. Theon breathed in and then out and felt the breath go through the castle and become part of it. He turned and went down into his work, because that is what a man does when the world asks him his name and he answers, and the answer must be made flesh.